Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City of Bettendorf City Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Monday, June 6, 2022. It's 5 o'clock p.m. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We start with a couple items to appear at items 7 and 8 on our agenda for tomorrow night. This is a rezoning of 1200 Devils Glen Road. Community Development Director Mark Hunt has joined us. Mark, thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just a few things to go over with you. We've had a lot of discussion about this case. I wanted to kind of put some slides in front of you today just to answer some questions that came up during our last meeting. So 1200 Devils Glen Road, this is a conditional rezoning, I will point out, R1 to R4. It's going to be conditioned on the concept plan, which I'll go over here with you briefly. Again, just background, applicant's David Kempen, R1 to R4. It used to be a PUD. When we revoked that, in our revocation, it kind of refers back to R1 by default, if you will. It's a 10-acre site. It had an industrial manufacturing component on it for some time. That has ceased probably a year or two ago, maybe more. It's become kind of de facto junkyard. So you can see in the photograph on the screen, there's some cars and collections of things there. There was an office and single-family dwelling unit that caught fire in 2021. I'm catching the mayor's attention.
I'm just trying to fix something on the screen.
Yes, sir.
Doing great.
So just continue a little bit here. They tore that building down after the fire. Probably it's been over a year ago now that it's been torn down. That pretty much ended all of the former Quad City industrial maintenance construction use of the site. It would be considered an illegal non-conforming use at this point, given that it's R1 and there's kind of de facto junkyard status right now. Just the concept again. I'm going to show you the same drawing both on white or plain, and I'll also show it to you with an underlayment of an aerial photo. We have 3 apartment buildings, and then a row of townhouses here, 126 total units. If I can remember how to clear my annotator. The whole site is calculated in the density, but remember this whole area, all of this is under easement, roughly. It's not quite accurate, but between the purple line and the middle of Duck Creek, which is the red line. R4 would allow a minimum of 2,500 square feet of development area per unit. That's about 2,970 square feet per unit. Density is comparable to the Bettendorf Regency at 2505 Devils Glen Road, so just a little ways north. One access will be provided. It's just in this location here. There'll be ample utility connections. This is a developed part of town. All that stuff's already there. On-site parking is plentiful. There'll also be some underground parking or under floor parking, if you will, under the apartment buildings. There'll be no freestanding parking-only garages. Those will not be built. Snow and trash removal will be done privately. That will not be done by the city. Sidewalks exist. If there are any changes, they'll have to return those sidewalks back to the prior condition. I would point out a turn lane being added here. And Brent, if you want to give some details on that.
Is your traffic slide next, Mark? Otherwise, I'll just wait till we get to that slide.
We got a couple more till we get there. Density in green space, 12.6 units per acre. You could do up to 18 per acre, just in mass, if you will. This is less than the Regency apartments, which are 16 per acre, again, less than a mile up the road. Lots of interior green space are contemplated with this concept plan. I'll note this corner here, which is roughly a 1/4 acre of interior green space. You also have the space between the apartment buildings that will be in the green space. And then, of course, the entire easement that the city has access to for use as the bike path access. That's roughly 5 acres. So total site, 10 acres. You've got 6 acres roughly, probably 5.5 at least in green space. Some of it is interior and some of it is on the rear of the property, as you see. Lots of buffering will be required. I will note that a fence and 20-foot buffer will be required on the north boundary. That has been updated in our recent analysis, but it's not shown on the drawing here. At the site plan level, we will address that. Duck Creek provides a south and west boundary, again with that large easement, so lots of buffering there to the south and to the west. And then there's a 35-foot buffer with a berm and landscaping along Devil's Glen Road, which across the street is the petitioners has a trailer park just across the street in this location. So the buffer between the road and the setback and then the landscaping will be there between those two uses. Brent, I'll turn it over to you for traffic.
Sure. So I know several. Mark, you want to go ahead first?
Mark, was that buffer required by ordinance, or was that something that the applicant offered up?
Good question. So the 20-foot buffer is required on the north end here. That's required because you have an R4 up to an R1. The fence is not required, but that was offered as a goodwill gesture by the applicant.
Okay.
The 35-foot buffer with berm is per code. We will work on the placement of that berm, the height of that berm, if you will, so we don't create any unsafe vision angles or line of sight. But that meets code with the 35-foot with a berm and landscaping.
Okay, if this was all the duplex condominiums like they have, or fourplex condominiums, I guess, like they have against Devil's Glen Road, would that buffer have been required?
It would not, because you could accomplish that with an R3, and R3 to R1 does not require an increased buffer. There'll be maybe a 5 or 10-foot buffer, but not a 20-foot buffer.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I'll just go back to the traffic slide here.
Yeah, so I know several of these bullet points that you see on the slide here were questions that came up 2 weeks ago. So wanted to go over a few things, starting with the background traffic that's actually present on Devil's Glen. So what you see there are the last 3 traffic counts. So the Iowa DOT does our traffic counts. They do all across the state for local municipalities. Do them every 4 years, so we'll be having more counts done here, most likely in August. But as you can see, we've actually had a decrease in traffic in this particular section of Devil's Glen. This is consistent with Bi-State's traffic demand model, hovering in that 9, 10, 11,000 AADT vehicles per day. So the capacity of a 4-lane road, so I know that was discussed in where we were at. You can handle approximately 30,000 vehicles per day on a 4-lane road. If you add a center turn lane and turn that into a 4-lane with center, you can take that up to 37,000 vehicles per day. And those are just planning capacities. That is to maintain somewhere in the range of a level of service D. Obviously, we want to stay well above that, and clearly we are. Just for comparison's sake, probably the highest section of traffic that we have in town is on Devil's Glen, just north of Middle Road, so right out in front of Hy-Vee. And the 2018 counts, the highest we were there was right about 22,000 vehicles per day. So you can see we have a drastic decrease as you head south on Devil's Glen and start getting into the neighborhoods. A lot of traffic drops off at that point, and then we pick some of it back up as we get down closer to Central. Accident history was a big point of discussion. That was a big discussion at Planning and Zoning as well. So the way the accidents get categorized is they actually generally get placed at the nearest intersection, or if there's a physical address, sometimes that, but most likely usually is intersections. So the DOT does not have an actual intersection identified there because it's just a single property use. So the traffic study that was the draft traffic study that we have prepared looked back at the last 10 years, which is standard process, and found a total of 56 accidents that occurred over a 10-year span between Central and State. Unfortunately, with no near intersection, there was no additional accident history up there. So most likely any of the accidents that got reported or were discussed by some of the neighbors probably were categorized closer to Central in terms of physical
State
location. Might have even been pushed all the way down to there. That average is significantly below, about 20% below the statewide average. So while there is an accident history, it is not a significant accident history. Want to go to the next slide? Site distance was the big thing, additionally, that was discussed. So when this concept first came to us, actually had 2 points of access. There was one at the very north, and then the existing location that they currently are showing. We had severe concerns about the site distance at that point because you're right at not quite the crest of the hill, but you've got both a horizontal and a vertical curve going on there. So your road's turning sideways and it's also going downhill, which did create some problems. So we worked with the developer to remove that proposed location there. Stuck with the one access point, and then have worked through them in terms of the deceleration right turn lane that was added. So the draft traffic study, and I did confirm this afternoon, I will have the final draft tomorrow from the traffic engineer. He responded back and will get that to me. He apologized. He was supposed to have that to us already. The draft traffic study, traffic impact study, actually did not indicate the need for a right turn lane, a deceleration lane. Now, that was based strictly on traffic volumes. So that is your peak hourly volumes, and you compare that to a chart. You take your graph, and there's a demarcation line, and if you fall above it, you need one. If you fall below, it did not require one. After providing some of this additional information, had the discussion with the developer, and the traffic engineer went back out and looked and really took a dive into the geometrics of the ground. He did decide that he wanted to recommend that, so that is included in that final traffic impact study, and obviously that's included in the concept plan as well. So that addresses the southbound traffic. Northbound traffic actually has really good sight lines because your crest is significantly further away. It's about 1,600 feet, I believe, up at right about Central. So no need for one there. You have plenty of time, and obviously we have enough capacity with that 9,000 cars a day to not have a concern about left turners in at that location.
Bill, go ahead.
I would contend that being familiar with the entrance to Devil's Glen Park there, with a gradient that comes right up to the edge of paving, that's probably a more hazardous situation than the drive across the street that's proposed.
Yeah, you do have you have a blind turn there because of the
Yes.
grade that's coming up. You're at 5 or 6% coming up that grade, if not more.
Thanks, Brent. Brent, will there be a northbound left-hand turn lane, like a suicide lane in the middle of the?
There will not be.
They're
no,
not gonna be-
just-
don't
no,
need
because
that?
we do have the volumes did not warrant that, and we don't have any sightline concerns there. The biggest concern you'd have is if you were coming, so the reason we had the concern, let's say southbound, is if you had somebody queued in there waiting to take a right-hand turn lane without the right turn, you're coming up over that curve and around the corner that you may not have the time to react properly and try to get over.
Okay.
You've got a very significant amount of distance between that sight line.
Well, you see 'em at
crest of the
State
hill
Street.
Central.
Yeah, and there's turn lanes left and right all the way up. I just was interested. Thank you, sir. Other questions, Jerry?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have one concern, and that's about the trees. We pride ourselves in being a tree city, and yet a couple of recent developments why the developer went in there and clear cut the whole area despite commitments to do otherwise. I see no need to cut all the trees down in the easement area. Do we have a commitment from the developer that he's not going to clear cut the easement area?
That would be correct. So right now, the easement is really just kind of natural area.
Yes.
It's park-like, if you will.
Yes.
It will continue to stay that way. I will note that there will be some work required for storm drainage that will be required to be put in. And when they put that in, I don't think they're going to be able to do it all underground. So there may be some cutting selectively, if you will, for that area, but not a clear cutting or mass removal. It would be just against his own interests, honestly, to spend that much money for area he's not going to be able to develop and can't develop ever anyway.
Yeah, I think aside from utility construction and building construction, you won't see any in that south area.
That's, if you go back to your, that's on the screen, that's that area that you had the squiggly lines on.
Yeah.
So none of that is gonna be disturbed per se.
Let me just,
And that's where you were referring to, were you not, Jerry?
Correct.
now,
Yeah, we do have a few utility connections through there, but
to come through
that's
with
pretty, a narrow
maybe
corridor that they can do.
a line or two like
It's
that, where he might have to take a few just trees in a row out.
Yeah, and obviously there's trees up in the construction area that'll have to be taken out. But according to the drawing, he proposes to replace at least 22 of them, so.
That's correct, and I would expect him to make this area more accessible and remove these trees, so there's kind of a flat area for people with dogs or whatever, kids to play. So you might see some trees come out there. But what he's proposing here, and again, this is concept only, so it's not 100% accurate. What he's proposing here, I think, would mitigate that.
Thank you.
Scott?
One thing on the trees, he's gonna have to remove trees a ways back from the buildings, because you can't have roots coming up underneath those footings, so he's gonna have to do into part of that, but my question is on the traffic study, what speed did they figure the sight lines at?
They would run it at the speed limit plus 5 miles an hour.
So what's the speed limit on Devil's Glen?
I believe it's 35. Yeah.
35? So they do it at 40? How many people you think drive 40 miles an hour down Devil's Glen Road?
Here's the thing, we can do that on any road around town. We have to have at least some type of standard that we can apply.
How much does it change the sight lines by going up 10 miles an hour? Is it quite a bit?
I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head.
Greg?
Thank you, Honor. Would it be an idea possibly to see that area by the rec trail and up does nothing for them, right? I mean, they're not gonna build on it, they can't do anything with it. Do you think they deed that over as part of the deal, or give them a buck or something and make that just kind of an extension of Devil's Glen Park? And then we can control what happens there?
I can see some logic in that. Staff has not approached them about any type of deal to purchase that easement area. I will tell you in my research, and Taylor, who worked on this years ago, the city had some contemplation of possibly buying this ground or actually condemning this ground to get access to it to create the bike path. It ended up being, for whatever reasons at the time, that the easement was given. It provided us our bike path. We allowed them to have an industrial use at that time, which was not conforming, I will point out. But since we got the easement, we allowed that use to come in. That was a deal that was laid then. Now we're 30 years on, and if we wanted to approach that and staff were directed to do so, we could.
I
Wouldn't it
don't
make
know, it
your,
might be a terrible idea, but
would it not make your zoning now non-conforming again, though? Because you're using that acreage to hit your density requirements. If you take 5 acres out of there,
That's correct.
you're probably not gonna hit your density.
So
You're
the
gonna be
agreement-
high density at that point in time.
So the agreement that's in place, you're correct, Councilman Webster, the agreement that's in place and the way we actually calculate density is we take the whole parcel into account. And the agreement that we signed to get the easement stated, if future consideration for development will consider the whole acreage for density purposes. That's darn near an exact quote.
My suspicion is the reason it was crafted that way was they probably wanted us to buy the easement, and we weren't interested in buying that ground at that time, and they probably wanted a lot of money because they considered it to be, you know, headquarters of a future residential development.
Other questions for Mark or for Brent Morlock, our city engineer? Thanks for joining us, Brent.
I have
Okay,
a
that will
couple more
appear, go
slides.
ahead.
More slides, sir, if you want them, or I can.
Oh,
I
well,
can
go
cut to the
right ahead.
chase.
I don't want to cut you short.
Thank you. We're paid by the hour. So just a question on the bike path, impact on the bike path. In staff's opinion, this has no impact on the bike path. There's no change to access. There's no change to the existing easement. It's roughly 5 acres. That 5 acres will not be developed. There's been some talk about sight lines and things like that. I'll point out there's an existing barn that's probably taller than the buildings, or as tall as the buildings that are proposed. It's 116 feet off the bike path. And the concept plan, which again is kind of rough math, the apartments will be 100 feet at their closest point, and the majority of the apartments will be 160 to 200 feet from the center of the main bike path lane, if you will. There were some questions about housing that were raised. This is market rate housing to be paid for by the free market by willing buyers or renters, as the case may be. It does support Goal D, provide housing options and reinvest in existing neighborhoods. This is certainly an existing neighborhood that hasn't had a lot of investment in it. I'll point out it's a quarter mile from our industrial area where we sorely need workers and people that live nearby that can get to work. It's a 1/10 of a mile from Central Avenue, an area that we know needs some redevelopment, gentrification. And townhomes and apartments are in high demand locally and also nationally. So this same meeting is taking place in city after city, if you will, across the country. We have 7 considerations. I will not read these to you, but that we have to consider as staff. We believe this meets all the required merits of these considerations. And we still have a positive review even after looking at the questions you asked us to look at. P&Z committee approved it unanimously. And again, this is a conditional rezoning conditioned on the concept plan, traffic study that is just darn near done, as we know. and that it will be materially significant or materially like the concept plan that's been provided to you. Yes, sir.
Bill, go ahead.
How would you define the word principle in condition number 2?
So the actual drawing, if you wanted to measure it out and be schematic about it and have a foot equal a foot, we're gonna have to play with it a little bit. We already know there's a 20-foot boundary that needs to be built in. They'll probably lose a little of that park in the south, which I think is probably a good idea. Changes of concept that would be more than, I would say 10% is kind of the use that we use in code for similar type items. So if you have a 10% larger housing or 10% less, even in this case, we might want to consider taking it back to council. So I'll use the 10% rule because that's what's codified, if you will.
So they could increase density by 10%? Is that what you're saying?
It's a possibility that they would increase density by 10%, but I don't see them doing that. I think they're going to have to stick with what they gave us. I think that's going to be a tough road for them to hoe.
Might be a better way to phrase it, to put down that it's not going to exceed the number of units that they're proposing at this time. That way they don't get to hedge the bet and add 10% to it, so.
Yeah, of course, but if they were taking away 10% of the apartments and adding on the townhomes, I think some of us would find that a positive.
Yeah, Chris?
Well, would, they could reduce the number of units.
That's
but
what I mean, yeah.
I think everything, the traffic study and everything was based on the max number of units that they said they were proposing. So just something to consider.
And if I could just add, if you
bet.
don't mind, the agreement itself doesn't use the word principle, it uses material respects. So,
Okay.
so I think material respects would mean that if they increase density or if they added to the units, I think that that's a material term of that agreement. So it's a little different than in principle. It's material, I think that's a material term from my position.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking the word principle was pretty interpretive.
Any other questions on items 7 and 8 to appear tomorrow? Frank, do you have any questions there? You don't have to come on if you don't want to. Just if it's good to go, it's good to go. You can unmute and speak up anytime you want. We hope you are doing well. All right, let's move to item to appear, number 10. This is with regard to a code section about solicitation in public areas. For this, we welcome our city attorney, Chris Curran.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have an item on the agenda tomorrow, which is the repeal of a section of our city code. It's section 711, addressing solicitation of money in public areas, also known as, I think to some, the panhandling ordinance. We did receive a letter from the ACLU indicating that in the position of the ACLU is that the ordinance is unconstitutional as a content-based restriction under the First Amendment. And certainly cities across the country are getting similar letters. A number of cities in Iowa received a letter at the same time that we did, and a couple of years previous, a number of cities in Iowa got a similar letter and repealed their ordinance. Essentially, these panhandling ordinances address a certain type of activity, requests of money, as opposed to other types of speech, including political speech or commercial speech, or just somebody giving their perspective on whatever issue it may be that they have an interest in. And so that is considered by the courts to be a content-based restriction. And so in my opinion, and looking at what the courts have done, including some pretty significant Supreme Court decisions, this ordinance is not constitutional. And I do recommend that we repeal it. Certainly, I wasn't here when this ordinance went into play, but I do know that the idea behind it was safety of pedestrians, of people asking for money, of drivers in their cars. And so that's certainly a key consideration then, as it is now. The police chief and I have, as well as Keith's team, we've looked at the issues, we've looked at what's on the books already. We feel like there's good language in our code as it is, even if the council does decide to repeal it, we feel like there's good language in the code to address the issue, to address the safety issue to the people asking for money as well as the drivers and others in the area. Keith can speak more to that, but we certainly realize that safety is a key issue. The issue here, I think, is it dealt a lot with medians, or it dealt a lot with being within a certain distance of a controlled intersection. And those medians are oftentimes a place where people will picket, or will have some sort of, be delivering some sort of speech. And so here we want to deal, right at this point, I think my position is, and Keith's would be, that we deal with the issue of being in the roadway. And if we at some point in the future determine that there is a median that is dangerous, and we have evidence that it's dangerous, then we at that point can hone in on that particular area or that particular median. But so in my mind, from a legal standpoint, I think the best course of action is to repeal this ordinance, to rely on the city code sections that we have, as well as Iowa code sections, and then see how it plays out. But I guess I would like Keith maybe to give his perspective as well.
Chief of Police Keith Kimball.
Thank you, Your Honor. I concur with Chris. After looking at everything, our intentions were always obviously good back in the day when the panhandling ordinance went into effect. But looking at everything, we've got 2 traffic codes that specifically deal with the actual behavior of entering onto the roadway and obtaining money for solicitation. That is in our traffic code that I feel that are adequate for dealing with that specific situation. So I think going forward, I think this is the prudent thing to do also. And I think we're good with our current codes and dealing with any situations that would come up. And as Chris said, if we can just always, as the future goes, if there's an issue that we need to address, we can look at it further.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions? Jerry?
Thank you, Your Honor. So I have a question about liability. So if someone is standing in the median, not in the roadway, but in the median, and a car accidentally jumps the curb and hits that individual, is the city liable?
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, it's,
This is a slap.
so a median has been found by the court to be a place where speech takes place. And so that's where, if it's a particularly wide median, the statutes and the ordinances deal with being in the roadway. That's why I think looking at a median in the future, if it's a very narrow, particularly dangerous median, then we could take action to prohibit people from being there. But the question would be, is that a place where you come into as you're crossing a street, you cross a street, you come to a median, you cross another street. It's all very specific. But the court has found that medians are a place where public can speak. And so as long as we aren't aware of, we aren't negligent in some way, which I can't imagine how we would be, liability is not something that I'm concerned about.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chief, one of the things our ordinance did was give us an opportunity to speak to those folks who might wish to go out and panhandle so that we could provide community service to these folks. That was kind of one of the number one things. And of course, you have a clear interest in that. Is this going to be something that your officers can continue to do if they see somebody and maybe help connect them with services? Because I think as a healthy community, we'd certainly want anybody who needs some sort of a financial resource to be able to get the help they may need.
Thanks, Mayor, for bringing it up. And that was one of the other good intentions of the past ordinance, was to, in fact, have contact with people to get them services through our social worker and stuff. So with the repeal of the ordinance, obviously, we wouldn't have that type, but I will just tell you that our officers will continue in their daily patrols if they have an opportunity to engage these people voluntarily to maybe at least offer that and provide more information for them if they would like.
Great, thank you. Based on that, any further questions? Okay, that's all. Don't, excuse me, item 10 to appear on tomorrow night's agenda. We'll move to our consent agenda and look at item B as in boy. For this, we welcome our Finance Director, Jason Schatt. This is with regard to some new software to help run Jason's department, something called Enterprise Resource Planning Systems. Jason.
Thank you, Your Honor. I know that's a mouthful, so we use the acronym ERP for that term. As you're well aware, the IT strategic plan identified the replacement of the current financial system as its top priority, our top priority, and we are certainly taking it that way. We believe that planning for that system and the development of an RFP are crucial steps in the selection process. And because of that importance, we would like to hire a consultant to help us through that process. Barry Dunn, who actually completed our IT needs assessment, has quoted this project at $129,500 to carry out some needs analysis, some RFP planning. They would actually put the RFP out to the market and then help us analyze those responses from vendors, and then ultimately help us with negotiations for pricing with that eventually selected vendor. We did reach out to another vendor to see if the pricing was fair, and we feel that this price is more than fair, especially given our experience with Barry Dunn and what we know they've done with some of our counterparts around here in the area. So there will be a consent agenda item for your consideration tomorrow night, just authorizing us to go ahead and start that process with Barry Dunn.
Questions for Jason? Greg?
Thank you, Your Honor. Does this company have a dog in the fight as far as the, like they have a subsidiary that does the next step?
No, they are completely independent from the vendors that we'll be considering.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Other questions? Bill?
Can you explain a little bit more about the needs assessment memo? That is the highest price tag of any of these line items that they're proposing.
Yeah, so that didn't go unnoticed because we feel like we just completed one, right, last summer. And this needs assessment will get down really into the nitty gritty on the finance side. What kind of tools are we looking for? What kind of holes in our operations are we hoping to fill with this next system? As you know, Bill, the system we're on today is over 30 years old and has some opportunities for improvement. So I think Barry Dunn will be able to help us identify what's out there to help us fill some of those gaps that today we don't even know about.
Thank you.
Other questions on this item? Greg, go ahead.
What's the timeline do you think it'll take from getting this planned out and then bidding it and getting it done?
We would
3 years?
We would expect the RFP process, so all of Barry Dunn's work, putting it to the market, analyzing those responses to take at least 6 months. And we're probably a year away from fully selecting and starting implementation of a new system. Implementation of that new system, I would anticipate taking between 2 and 3 years to fully get it on board.
So this can be funded over several budgets?
Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I'd like to entertain a motion that consent item B as in boy remain on tomorrow night's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll take it up tomorrow as consent B, and we've got Frank says a yes. All right, we move to consent item G. This is the Forest Green subdivision. Consent item G. Mark Hunt, our Community Development Director. Share with us what's happening here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. This would be a case that would be familiar to you since you've already had the rezoning come through. So I won't go through quite all the slides because I think some of that's going to be pretty redundant for you, but I will give you a quick background. Dick McNamara Construction LLC. The request here is a preliminary plat, 49 single-family homes, 19 townhomes, 118 units total, 3.9 units per acre would be the density. So the northeast corner is designated for future commercial and is not considered in this preliminary plat or in the rezoning that you've already passed. That rezoning was case 22008, moved it from A1 to R3. That was a conditional rezoning, I will add. Again, conditional rezoning based on a concept plan here that you see in front of you. Shows you the location of the townhomes, mainly on the east side, and the single-family homes mainly on the west side. This area is not in consideration for development, that's reserved for future commercial use. We have a 35-foot rear setback along the edges from the neighboring farms and single-family homes. And as a preliminary plat, you'll receive this document. Again, it matches, it's materially significant to the Alderman's question before, or materially like, if you will. It shows the same layout. We have the outlot here for drainage that provides some nice buffering to that future development where there is currently a farm. It keeps the same buffers along these edges, which we thought was important. And then the required setbacks here along these roads as required by code. We'll have 5-foot sidewalks. There will be a crosswalk that will be located on Forest Grove Drive, and that will connect to the sidewalk network in Sterling Woods and Spencer Hollow. And then I think Brent can give you a little bit of update on some of the sewer connectivity.
Yeah, one additional item I wanted to mention is that the applicant will be required to develop or dedicate, additional right-of-way on both Forest Grove and Criswell for future development. So that'll give us a total of 100-foot of right-of-way for both of those streets for future reconstruction. Sewer has been long discussed for this property as it's not immediately available. A lift station was considered initially. The city also had discussions with them on how we could best work to try to bring gravity sewer to the site, which is present just west of the Huntington Meadows addition. Sewer would have to be brought along Hopewell, and then initially we were looking at, the developer was bringing that up along Criswell. It's a pretty significant run of sewer there. Also doesn't really benefit the adjoining properties aside from them because we know we can't sewer anything on the east side of Criswell. We just don't have the depth. The property to the south, beyond the farm, maybe you can go back to one of the aerials. Show a little better. Yeah, so that property and the one to the west is currently under a purchase agreement by another interested party, and they are looking at working with the developer to bring sewer up through the center of that property, would provide sewer to the 60 acres that is there, would also significantly cut the sewer costs to get gravity sewer to the McNamara project, and for the city's end, would eliminate the potential of another lift station for us. So that's looking like that's going to move forward. I've got a meeting later this week with Townsend and McNamara to start looking at the design of that.
Catch back up to my slides here. I think we talked about the drainage lots and those. I will note that street names have yet to be finalized. We will do that with the final plat, and we'll have those for you. A quick rendering of what the townhomes will look like. Of course, the single-family homes, those will be custom built, so we don't have renderings for those. 3 to 4 units, 1 story. These are to accommodate the 55 and older crowd, everything on one level. And we have a positive staff recommendation, and we had a positive P&Z recommendation. I'd be glad to answer your questions.
Questions? Jerry?
Thank you, Your Honor. Another follow-up question on trees. The trees that are shown on the drawing there, are they required by our code or by the conditional rezoning, or are they just to make the picture look pretty?
Okay, so let me go back up to that slide. So the conditional rezoning did contemplate that there would have to be a like amount of buffering and landscaping put in. We will still have a site plan review on this portion. So we'll get a site plan review with a landscape plan and all the things that you're used to on those. For the single family side, we won't have the site plan, but we will condition COs, certificates of occupancy, if you will, to include landscaping that is significant or similar to what you see on this screen. So when you have a single family home developed, before we give a CO, we'll have a sign off on the landscaping at that point. And that's been explained to the developer, and it's really his job to explain that to future buyers, but my staff will do so as well.
And so you anticipate those trees proposed, by the proposed detention area will actually be put in?
I do, yeah. We'll have a site plan for that area for sure, so we'll be able to navigate that.
Very good, thank you.
Scott?
Has there been any discussion with this particular developer? Because this would be a good spot for us to be attempting to do concrete, curb and gutter and asphalt, and a good starting point to try to get the lower costs to the taxpayers for maintenance on those said roads.
Yep, that is part of the meeting that I'm having later this week with them.
Bill?
I'm a little over 4 years removed from being actively involved in the zoning ordinance, and my memory has started to fade long before that. But can you remind me what are the allowable uses in the neighborhood commercial area?
I can, because that comes up a lot. Neighborhood commercial is your lowest, it would step into your lowest level of commercial zoning. So future land use here, folks, we're talking about is neighborhood commercial. So that means you could zone to a C1 roughly, or specifically, I should say. And that is your lowest level of zoning, commercial zoning. And so you're talking the smaller footprint gas stations, small neighborhood restaurants, light office, nothing of that C2 level, which we've had some trouble with because C2 seems to kind of open the door pretty wide, and you would not be able to go to a C2 level in a neighborhood commercial future land use.
So gas station would be an option.
I think so, yep. I think it's limited pumps, limited gas. So that's the smaller footprint. Those aren't very attractive. When I get calls about that and I explain that fact to our gas station companies, and I tell them they're limited on their pumps, I think to 8, don't quote me, they frown and kind of shrug. So it tends to turn that away. I'm not saying you wouldn't get somebody that might take it at that an 8 pump or limited capacity, but it tends to turn people away.
I remember we had a kind of quasi-similar development to this in Wyndham Hills with a commercial neighborhood commercial land use on the corner, and the developers put a restrictive covenant in there that gas stations would not be allowed. Usually for some odd reason, neighbors get excited about gas stations, and I think everybody gets excited about it because it's $4.75 a gallon now, but I'm just thinking about the fight down the road.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And, given that this particular discussion at hand doesn't allow us, to really peer into that piece and what might be there, I think you've brought up all the salient points, and we'll have to discuss those when they get here. We do have a chance to update our zoning code. We're working on that. We do have a comprehensive plan coming up. We'll work on that as well, and there may be some opportunities to get ahead of this.
Thank you.
Yes, Greg?
Thank you, Your Honor. 2 questions. The sidewalk, sorry, Jerry, I'm stealing your thunder.
Go
The
for it.
sidewalk on Forest Grove on the north side, is that in the big plan, is that from Middle Road over to the school and the park, is that a rec trail on the north side?
Correct. So currently we have a 10-foot trail across the frontage at Forest Grove Park. There's only a 6-foot walk in front of the new Forest Grove Elementary School. The thought was always that when the city came through and did a full reconstruction, that 6-foot walk would be replaced with a 10-foot walk. We do have a 4-foot walk across the frontage of Spencer Hollow and Sterling Woods, so we do have connectivity there. We are looking at a much larger potential grant that we're looking at submitting to help funding the pedestrian bridge, possibly through the state of Iowa. As part of that, we're looking at a lot of ancillary trails in that area, and one of them would be making sure we can get all the way from all the way from Middle Road to Forest Grove. Either the park, ideally, I'd like to get to the park. If it meant we had to stop at the school, at least we have a 6-foot walk in there. But yes, the intent is eventually that's a full 10-foot
So
path all the way through
what
there.
sidewalk would, what size sidewalk would be on the south and north side in this development?
So they won't be required to place a sidewalk on the south side. They would be, the builders would have to bond for it, because we still have the berm and ditches through there. So until we have curb and gutter.
Sure.
There wouldn't be, that would just be, I think by code, I think it would need to be a 6-foot walk on the south side with the 10-foot on the trail on the north side.
Okay, so the north side will have a 10-foot.
It will, it'll still be kind of pieced together because I don't see us going back and say redoing the 4-foot walk in front of Spencer Hollow or Sterling Woods until we do the road.
Sure.
Through there. But when the road comes through, yes, at that point we would.
Second question, Criswell, I know half of it's ours, half of it's county. And if you just take a swag, how long do you think before that's gonna be?
So if you'll remember correctly, last year I put in, into the CIP, a line item for both Indiana and Criswell to do, at a minimum, this was just a full depth reclamation, but it's at least a hard surface. It's not the seal coat because we're beating that seal coat up. It's bleeding every year.
Well, there's gonna be a lot more
right now-
traffic out there.
Right now, Indiana was originally scheduled for next year, and then Criswell was in '24. We're gonna have probably some pretty major changes, I think, this fall when we go into CIP with what we're seeing for construction pricing. And Indiana actually is holding up relatively well. We're not seeing nearly as much traffic out there. We did a different seal and some heavy patching in there. We've done some additional patching this year in a couple areas that were struggling, some full depth asphalt. So my thought's probably gonna be to push Indiana back 2 or 3 years, keep Criswell where it's at, because I don't see a way that we're gonna be able to move it up. I'd love to, but I don't think we're going to. And I've already had discussions with the Scott County engineer about getting their portion of that funded as well. So I think we're still probably 2 years out from that, but that'll get you an asphalt surface. It'll be 24 or 26 feet wide, 5 inches. So it'll be a significant upgrade for what we have right now.
That's gonna get busy.
But from the STP perspective, we have, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we have Forest Grove east from Middle or the new roundabout to Criswell as our next priority. And that's probably 6 years.
We have, so what we're required to do for STP is just give them our entire list of projects. So we don't actually have to rank them for any reason. I think internally we've talked about that, but right now, as part of our Forest Grove Phase 4 project, in conjunction with the FG80 development, that's gonna get us to the east edge of the FG80 development, property line there. So whether we decide at that point that we wanna submit for that, my thought potentially is we might want to start looking back at Middle at this point because of all the traffic I think that we're going to be generating with the reconstruction of the interchange. One of those two. But either way, from a full reconstruction point on Criswell, I got to say we're 15 years out because the money's just not there. We only get about $4 million a year.
That should go up a little bit.
4.2.
It's
We're
looking like
happy
it's
with the
come up.
infrastructure. It had so much infrastructure in it.
Different kind.
Yeah, whatever.
Our hope would be that you could apply for those outside of or in addition to your STP funding today, but the initial indication is it still has to get into the STP plan. So today, that means, to Brent's point, it's in part of the planning process, it's further out. We just were able to have, for lack of a better word, an earmark with Congressman Miller Meek's office, a submittal, we've not had it approved yet, for the engineering of Middle Road. If that comes to pass, and we hope that it does, I agree with Brent, that moves up our Middle Road probably ahead of Forest Grove.
Yeah, at that point, we're quote unquote shovel ready. You know, we would have right of way, we would have all the intersections designed. So I think we could be a very strong contender for some of these other grant programs that right now we just don't fit in.
And then to that point, to your point, Scott, at that point, perhaps you could find another program that would allow this to go around STP.
I just wonder, because I mean, there was talk that there was all this infrastructure money, and then it just poof.
So we're,
STP's not getting any extra money?
STP is getting.
They are getting a little.
They're getting about 30% more is what we anticipate. So that, but that still only works out to a little over $1 million a year.
Brent, do you want to explain to him where Central Avenue falls in?
Yeah, so Central is already funded. That is, was funded through our STP process, and that is 2024 right now, full resurfacing of all that. That could potentially move forward if, you know, some of this additional funding comes forward and we go out for additional, but the problem is, for us to do one of these large projects like we've historically limited our applications to, we have to get 2 years of funding. And we're programmed out right now 4 years out. So the lookout and trying to project those costs, these larger projects, I think are going to become somewhat problematic if we see construction costs continue the way they are.
How much is Central?
Central was a little under $2 million award.
Wh-
Total, it's about 3 million, but that
Are you
was,
doing, that's not all of Central, I think.
that was resurfacing all of it. Yep.
From Devil's Glen all the way over to,
Yep, just a little west of Devil's Glen, 30th, I think, all the way over to 14th.
part of it's gotta be reconstructed though, doesn't it?
No, it's got a lot of asphalt on there. So there would be a decent amount of patching that I included in my estimate, as long as some other curb, but ideally, we're doing what we're doing on Middle, and we'll patch where we need to. So we had about 3 million total.
Pretty hollow over by 14th. Just warning you.
Pretty significant base underneath that road, particularly from 14th to probably 18th and maybe even 23rd.
And like I said, a lot of asphalt. It's been overlaid a couple times.
Any other questions on item G? All right, I'd like to entertain a motion that remain on tomorrow night's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll take up B and G. Council, please take a look at the remaining consent agenda items, and if anybody would like to ask any questions or be heard on any of the other items listed on consent, now is the time. Jerry?
Thank you, Your Honor. Item D, a couple years ago, we had an issue about Stafford Creek. Does this interplay with that?
So this is that same area. So there's actually two separate projects that we're lumping together, bidding together here to try to leverage some pricing. None of this is stream bank stabilization, because we're still under that court decision. We have 4 or maybe even 5 failed storm sewers that outlet into Stafford Creek, so that come in from the side streets, that at this point have completely, a full section of pipe has fallen off. It's laying in the bottom of the creek. So all we're going in is fixing those areas. We will have to technically stabilize that localized area, but we're not working up and down the creek. Like I said, we're still under that decree.
I have discussed this with Brent, and I'm comfortable that the scope of the easement issue that we ran into last time will not be present with what we're planning to do this time.
Yeah, we
It's a
have sent
different
out
scenario.
notifications to all the residents, have not heard anything back from, there are still a lot of the properties have changed hands along that stretch from 6 years ago, but there are still a few that are the same homeowners and have not heard anything.
But you also have permission from several of the property owners where this failed
Yep.
to come into their property, being allowed to go in there and do that. So this is different than when we didn't have their permission.
And we're gonna try
Thank
to
you.
build in a little bit of detention here as well. It's not on-creek detention, so it's not a huge benefit in terms of volume, but it is a huge benefit to some of these localized areas.
Is that is one of those, where we went out and
Yep.
looked at it?
At Tanglefoot Court,
Yeah.
at the dead end of that, correct.
Anything else on consent any particular council member would like to raise at this time? Questions on consent? Then I'd like to entertain a motion to approve our consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll take up all items on consent as written tomorrow. Any items to be added by council? Excellent job at Be Downtown. Excellent job at the zip code party. I think everybody had a great day. Thank you all for your hard work there. Great job, Mark, and the band, Panic River Band. Did I get it right?
Yes, sir, thank you.
All right.
Appreciate that.
11 o'clock on Saturday, we were down, had a great time. So great job, everybody.
Downtown was fun too. The
Yeah.
downtown event. that was
That's where we're at, yeah. All right, appreciate it. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We stand adjourned. Good work, people.